Brainerd, the Family Place Coordinator for the Arapahoe Libraries, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, the other early literacy librarians on the Child and Family Library Services team, Molly Lancaster, Mary Kuhner, and Lauren Graham. Within the Arapahoe Library District, we have 4 Family Place libraries, and we are building a 5th one out in Byers. Family Place libraries offer a broad range of support to families with young children, and one of the ways we do that is through parent-child workshops. At these workshops, we bring in early childhood specialists who can directly answer questions from parents. And one specialist who has been working with us for a number of years is with us tonight. That's Colleen Bredell, and we are thrilled to be able to share her with you in this virtual format. Colleen is an early childhood mental health therapist in private practice. She's going to start by talking about stress and transitions and other general behavior concerns, and then we'll have time for questions. If you have procedural or technical questions that need to be answered right away, please put them in the chat box and one of our librarians will respond to you. If you have a question that you would like Colleen to answer, please put that in the question and answer box. Thanks, and take it away, Colleen.
Hi, thank you all very much for joining us. I know your days are cram-packed full of all kinds of busy things and challenges and just more things to do than we probably have time to do them. Tonight, I was hoping to talk a little bit about some of the things that I'm hearing the most about in private practice from my families, my moms and dads and kids and caregivers. And I think that we, as we all know, are in an unprecedented time in history. And I think there's one of 2 ways that you can sort of look at the entire body of our experience right now. It's either going to be just absolutely full to the brim with challenges, or it's going to have a lot of challenges and we're going to be able to find some opportunities in the mix a little bit. And I think I sort of made a commitment early on to try to find as many opportunities or silver linings as possible, because this looked like it was going to be a very challenging and difficult road for folks. One of the things that I talk to people about, they're good, everything has a sort of 2 sides to the same coin. Time with your family will probably never look like this again. So that's a good thing, but it can also be a very challenging thing. You're getting a front row seat for those of you who are parents and teachers at the same exact moment. You are getting a front row to your kids' learning sort of profile. Now you get to hear things from teachers and you get to have your parent-teacher conferences, but you are actually, at least for the kiddos who are hybrid or homeschooled or online learning, you're in the front row. You get to see how your kid learns. You get to understand a lot more about them. I think that we've all had to change our priorities and refocus on things in a very different way. Some of that I think has turned out to be very, very good for families. And I think one of the things that people ask me the most about is what happens when everybody gets to start to approach the end of their rope and they're about at wit's end. I think that most of us have never had the same set of challenges to such a degree, because anything that we were challenged with before, we'd likely still have, and now we have additional challenges. So anything that was small before tends to look a lot bigger now, and I think that's getting a lot of people's attention. Family dynamics, finances, time management, space, school and strategies around learning, how we manage stress, how we manage our days, behaviors, what's working, what's not working. Any of those, even just managing feeding everybody 3 meals and snacks a day is not something with school-age children that we've done for a while. The first thing that I'm hoping will be helpful to folks is expectation is always going to be your greatest predictor of happiness. So if your expectation is that you're going to get your kids through their school day, they're going to get everything done perfectly, your house is going to be spectacular, your dinner is going to be amazing and very healthy and all that kind of stuff, my guess is that something's going to have to give. So what I tell everybody is there's my new normal is this good enough? Did I give it my best shot? Did I try my hardest? And can I let it go? That's the tricky part for most people. And it's tough for the kids too. Once you decide that you've done it your best, that you're level best, can you somehow manage to let it go? And I'm finding that many people are struggling with this. They're carrying frustrations and worries and concerns from day to day, hour to hour, and minute to minute, and it's building up and building up and building up. So one of the things that I urge people to do is be very mindful about what their expectations are, and are you letting go? It's like if you fill up a bathtub and never drain it, eventually it's going to boil over. And that's where people are finding that their kids are crabby, they're irritable, relationships are suffering. There's just too much going on. Or it's like when you shake a pop bottle, like the first couple maybe isn't so bad, but by the third one, things are starting to overflow. So I personally think, is it good enough should have been our goal all along, because by definition, that's all we've got. That's our capacity. We've met capacity at the good enough point. Because if you have, let's say your kid has 11 worksheets to do in one day and you spend 3 hours on one of them, something down the road is going to get pushed off or not complete or whatever, which is going to cause its own set of distressors. So one of the things that I tell people is there's a fine line between providing consistency and as much normalcy as possible, which I encourage everywhere you can. Make it feel as normal as you possibly can, even though we're in very unique times. And then there's some times where you just have to sort of let it go. And what I mean by that is I have people who are saying, my kid got something first thing in the morning and they're still working on it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You would never ever leave your child in the math classroom in your first grade or in the classroom from morning to night without breaks, without lunch, without going to the library or any of those kinds of things. So if you can replicate your school day as best you can. So for example, if they would spend 20 minutes on a worksheet in class, I urge people to spend 20 minutes on the worksheet in your home if you're on that part of the hybrid learning week. Don't spend an hour and a half on it. It's going to get discouraging. The thing that I am most concerned about is that kids are equating, and I see this every day, their today's learning, which is very unique and very trying for some kids, and learning in general. And what I don't want to happen is for kids to stop loving learning, which I think should be a lifetime joy, because they've associated with some very difficult and challenging means to learn and stress. So if the kid's stressed, the mom and dad, the caregivers are stressed, it's a very cumulative process. And I think it's affecting kids wanting to continue to learn. I have a lot of kids who are like, I hate school. I used to love school. I hate school. I don't want to learn anything. And I'm like, wait. Those are very different things. How we're going to school now and loving learning can coexist if we encourage the love of learning even through these difficult and very awkward times for some kids. For example, how to kind of bridge that fine line between providing consistency and sometimes managing the unusual. Maybe your kiddo's got a worksheet that has to be done on fall and what happens to the leaves. And you do the worksheet or you do it to the best of your ability, and then you go out and you actually look at the leaves and collect yellow leaves and orange leaves and green leaves and red leaves. And that is one of those things where it's like that adds the experiential piece to something that may have seemed mundane or difficult or challenging in some way. There's a million ways to sort of learn through your day that can correlate with what these kiddos are learning through the curriculums that they're following. The thing that I worry about most is the minute mom and dad or the caregivers get stressed, I start to see it on the kids. In fact, there was a news article last night on this very thing, is how to spot stress in your online learning and hybrid learning kiddos. They are getting very irritable. They are starting to demonstrate some behaviors that are very negative. They're antsy, they're irritable, they're crabby, they're picking fights. A lot of kids are starting to pull, their hair and twiggle their hair, or fidget in some other way, or tear at their tennis shoes, or demonstrate some of the anxiety that they're feeling in a very somatic or physical way. So what I always ask the parents is, and the caregivers and the teachers, is take your own temperature, see how you're feeling. Are you worried about the day? Are you concerned about getting through the day or managing all of the things that you are required to do during your day? If you can start in a better place, there's a trickle down to the kids and the rest of the family that tends to make for a little bit calmer day. But most people are going up and up and up, not down and down, and getting more calm. They're getting more anxious. So if you can, just see how you're doing and do a little bit of, I mentioned the word self-care one day, and this woman just about shot me. She said, I don't have time for self-care. And I argue all the time that you really probably don't have time to not take care of yourself, because if someone gets sick or they get so upset that they can't function in a way that's really healthy in their home, then everything's going to follow you. Everything's going to fall apart. So even if you have, instead of going for an hour walk, if you can even get out for a 10-minute walk, because that's all you have time for, that's way better. So when we're talking about, a lot of people have asked about kids' behaviors, and what I'm always anxious to talk about is the kids are learning from the grown-ups all the time. And so we have to check, are we being calm? Are we doing the things that we're asking them to do? Are we problem solving well? Are we communicating well? And I would say under a pressure, people do not communicate as well. You're further back in your brain and you're functioning when you're anxious or fearful. And I don't think people have the capacity to communicate quite as well or problem solve quite as well. So in terms of what folks are doing in terms of their daily routines, a lot of people are getting very caught up in the details and sort of missing the big picture. If your child is learning and they maintain their love of learning, then you're doing a good job. If your child is frustrated and crying and hating the whole affair, you got to probably try some different strategies and that might be easier for you and for the kiddo. And once you find your own rhythm, I know the school districts require different things and everybody's got a very different system of how they are managing this, but still within that system that you're in, you can find a rhythm that works for your family. The other thing, please keep in mind, is children need to move. They actually, and we know this through a lot of research, that children learn best when they're moving. So if you have core balls, yoga balls, anything like that that your kid can sit on when they're doing their work and they find it helpful, use it. If not, get them TheraBands and put them around the bottom of their seats, and they can use those. They put their feet behind them and kick, and those are very helpful as well. If your kids need a fidget, by all means, find something that works for them. Little kids can't really attend any between the age and the kid, between 5 and 15 minutes. Older kids, it's between 20 and 45 minutes, 50 minutes, depending on who you look at or ask in terms of research. So standing up and stretching, moving around, resets everything. Also, too, there's got to be food and water. Anybody who's getting depleted is going to be crankier and things are going to be harder. So the big stressors for everybody right now are hungry, thirsty, tired, sick, sensory issues like sitting too long, seeking proprioceptive input, avoiding input, or injury. So any of those things, if you can mitigate those or help them out with any of those things, the learning is going to go much easier. Because if somebody's got a hangnail that's driving them crazy and they're starving, it's very difficult to learn through that because your body takes priority over your learning. So if something is uncomfortable or you're out of sorts, it's much better to address that first, get that on the right track, and then go for the learning piece. If you can, a lot of people are telling me, I am so desperately worried that my child is going to get behind. And I realize this is a very controversial topic, but in my head, I continue to think all children in all places are trying to manage this literally globally. And so when people say my kids are going to be behind, I'm like, the kids who are behind who? I mean, if your child is in full time, they are getting more instruction, but then I've seen that many of those schools are quarantining grade by grade as people are exposed and so forth. So what I'm hopeful for is everybody's getting as much content as possible within whatever system that they're working in. So, and I'll also tell you that let's hope for the best, and that within a few months or so, or within a year for sure, things are much, much different. I don't want this to be a time that negatively impacts our children any more than it has to be. So I want them to still love to learn. I want them to be able to advocate for themselves. I want them to be able to even be more independent rather than less independent. I've got some folks who are in the room with the kids while they're learning all day long, and it's driving them crazy. And it's creating a dependence on the parent. The kids are looking and going, did I do it right? Did I do it right? And the teachers were not going to be able to manage that if every kid expects an immediate response to an inquiry of some sort. So I think that if you can spend time with your kiddo as appropriate as you can when you're working or trying to manage other things, and expect them to try their hardest. I say 3 tries, and then you ask for help. The little guys need obviously more help than that, but I think three tries to build a little bit of tolerance for frustration, and then you get the adult interventions. Not a bad strategy. If you can manage to put some balance into place, and then actually add some fun or something that you think would be enriching for both you and the kiddos, because maybe at the end of the day, a walk to gather those leaves, or a bug hunt, or something like that, especially for the folks with little guys. If you can manage to do that at the end of the day, or you have the opportunity to do that, that's probably good for you, good for the kid, good to get out of the house, and good to manage that some learning doesn't have to happen within the confines of technology. Behavioral strategies. So we need to set some new expectations. If you expect your kiddo, let's say, normally they would be ready to go to daycare or out the door to school or whatever by a certain time, and they need help with X, Y, and Z or activities. What I would say now is the time, if you didn't have time before, teach them one new thing a month maybe, or a week if the kids are older. One more thing that will help them be better prepped when things go back to what would be more normal or more typical. My bottom line is, and this is where it gets really fuzzy for a lot of folks, I say keep it simple. All non-preferred activities happen and are complete before preferred activities begin. And if kids learn that, that's a great lesson, because if we as adults go into our job and say, hey, I swear I'll get this report done, could you give me a 2-week advance on my paycheck? Most places are going to say no. So a lot of kids will be, if you just let me go do this, I'll come back and do my math, or I'll come back and do my worksheet, or whatever that is. And what I always say is take breaks, take brain breaks, take movement breaks, but then get all your work done so that it's not hovering all day. Some people are still working at this at 5 and 6 o'clock at night, which is entirely too long for everybody. So this is true, like even for teenagers, right? For teenagers, it looks a little different, but I always say if your homework's done, your chores are done, your attitude's good, your room is tolerable, then you get to go do all the things that you want to do and you think are important. For little kids, it might be, did you put your toys back in the basket? And once you do that, then we can go to the next thing. Have you put your plates in the sink? Once you do that, we can go to the next thing. So my rule is all non-preferred activities are complete before preferred activities begin. Movement is your key to success. Everybody feels better when they get up and stretch. Everybody, even as adults, we go to conferences and so forth. If I don't get up about every 35 to 40 minutes and stretch and move around, I find it very difficult to remain focused on the material. Little kids can't even get close to that. So if you can find a way to get them moving beforehand, I think that would be even better. Like I said, stress is cascading. So if you think of scales and you have this much stress, like it's just weighing you down, you literally have to do this much self-care. You have to do a little bit more. And I know everybody, so something else has got to give. It might be the laundry on that day. It might be something, I don't know. It can't be about safety or well-being, but something has to give. If you have to put this much more self-care in to manage your day because the level of stress is so high, you have to get it somewhere. It's like moving buckets, right? Changing finances. The one thing that I think people are getting the most confused about over time is when their kids become non-compliant, what they're supposed to do. And the reality of it is that when you're wearing more than one hat, if you are daycare provider and mom and dad and teacher and neighbor and friends because of the isolation, you kind of have to let the kiddos know what role you're in, because a lot of people are telling me their kids just say no. And I said, are they saying no to mom or dad and grandma? Or are they saying no to a teacher? Are they saying, there's no distinction for most of the kids about who's asking them to do what. And a lot of the school or preschool or even daycare piece of it, a lot of people are telling me, my kid would never do this at daycare. And that's right, they wouldn't. But they're not in daycare. Although you are filling that role right now, you will always be seen as mom and dad, grandma, whatever first. And so what I try to tell them is right now it's school time. So as I'm talking to you, it's school time. We're going to do things like we're in school. We're going to approximate things like what we would expect in the school setting. But you got to tell them up front, because otherwise they're just guessing. And a lot of times I think our roles are shifting because we're like, okay, finish up your homework, come to dinner. And in that moment, we transition from teacher to parent or caregiver. So I think that a lot of times those are some of the biggest challenges for everybody. But just remember, if it's confusing for you as an adult, it's really confusing for the kiddos. Some of the questions that I got early on in the week, I think are really probably pretty good for everybody. One of them is talking about having twins. They start with rough housing, and then things kind of go off the rails and things become very difficult. You can't always be in the room. However, what I would say is kind of keep an eye on how long it takes before somebody pops their top. So if, for example, the giggling and the tickling and it's all good for 10 minutes, then make sure that there is a separation at 8 minutes. Okay, somebody go wash your hands, somebody go clean that up, something goes on. Kind of figure out what the time limit is, because a lot of kids are not getting enough proprioceptive input in their bodies. And so what they're seeking is a sibling or a parent or a friend or whatever. They're seeking that input because they're not running and jumping at school and doing some of the things that they would typically do. And so when they start rolling, sometimes it's like going from 0 to 60. It's okay for a little bit, and then they're going too fast and they can't rein it back in. So if your kid's got an 8-minute limit before they start getting too wild or it goes into something more negative, then it's 7 minutes. You offer them something to do. You can roll them up in a towel or a blanket like a burrito, or you can swing them, or you can offer something different. But a lot of times you have to meet those physical needs before they can simmer down. If you have a sensory avoider, it's a whole different ballgame. That's the kid who needs quiet, right? They can take 8 to 12 or 14 minutes of lots of chaos, and then they just burst into tears. And that's the kid who's like, here's your cozy corner, here's your blankie, here's some water, have a seat, regroup. It's okay, all right? And you also have to know, as adults, we are also sensory seekers, sensory avoiders, and sometimes we're mixed bag. So know what you need physically, so that you can tend to your own needs as well. If you're like, I have to go stand out on the front porch and jump up and down 5 or 6 times to get things rolling, that's okay. That's just fine. Just know that. If you need to take a 5-minute break, make sure the kids are safe and well, and you go take your 5-minute break somewhere where you can, make sure you have, you can make sure that you have your eyes on them, but that you get a little bit of respite. One of these questions said that their kiddo gets overwhelmed and lashes out. Lots of kids, when they get overwhelmed, remember that they are traveling back from the very front of their brain, their prefrontal cortex, to the back of their brain, which is a much more primitive function. And once they get overwhelmed, they cease to have language. And that, I see it all the time. Parents will say, use your words, and the kid's screaming bloody murder. There are no words back here. This is very primitive. So once you get past about the midbrain, the words start to fade away. And that happens to us as adults as well. I've done it myself. And I'm starting to try to get a name out or a command out or something like that, but I'm so frustrated or hurt or whatever's going on that I can't get my words out. So just remember that the kids have got to come back to the front of their brain. They've got to simmer down a little bit before they can even communicate with you effectively, even if it's just a few words. The other thing with kids in particular is many of them, there's something called a touch point. And kids develop kind of like stair steps. They move forward, they stabilize, they regress a little bit, take a jump, they get on the next step. Now some new skill is developed, they come back, they regress, and they go to the next step. A lot of times what you will see in a growth spurt, which could be fine motor, gross motor, receptive language, expressive language, adaptive skills, social, emotional, cognitive, or it could be just straight up growing. Those are the ones you notice the most. People go, my kid was out of sorts terribly for 2 to 3 weeks. They weren't sleeping. They were just being really irritable. They were just really tough. And then things simmered down. I'm like, okay, what grew, right? Did all of their shoes stop fitting all at once? Were all their pants high waters all at once? Did they get 50 or 100 new words all at once? Were they able to kick a ball when they weren't able to do that before? Something was brewing that was taking energy away from all of the other skills. And I tell people, please think of a kid as a light board, like maybe 100 light bulbs indicating different developmental milestones and areas. And if there's 100 units of energy and that remains constant, when something pulls all the energy, they're getting new teeth or they're getting some gross motor skill or something like that, everything else dims out. And so you have all of those normal things going on every day anyway, and now we have all of these external changes and unique situations for our kiddos to manage. One mom was talking about turning on their listening ears, but they end up repeating requests. Even for little kids, they can learn pretty early, like 2.5, that requests have consequences. So instead of saying, would you please put that away, or would you please put the blocks back in the basket, what I tell people is start with choices right away. You want to parent your kids when they're young, like you want to parent them when they're teenagers. And you want that to be very normal for them. So if you had a teenager said, Mom, can I borrow the car? And you say, well, yes, I would love to loan you the car. Please have it back by 10. If you have it back after 10, you won't be able to use it the following week. Thank you very much. And you root them on. For little kids, you're like, as soon as you choose to put your blocks back in the basket, we'll be able to go on to the next thing, or we'll be able to have our snack, or we'll be able to do whatever. So it's not really a command. You've turned it into a choice. And they have to think about it. It actually processes differently in their brains at that point. So if you choose, or as soon as if you choose to put your blocks back into the basket, then we will get our snack. That is a very different thing than put your blocks back in the basket, put your blocks back in the basket, put your blocks back in the basket. Because kids are able to filter out familiar voices and commands pretty effectively. So they may hear it and just, you can see the words going one side and right out the other. But if you say, when you put your blocks back in the basket, then we can go on to do the thing you really wanted to do, or go for the walk, or whatever it is. that associates an action with a consequence, which all things that we do in our lifetimes have some consequence in some form, either positive or not so much. But I think that's a really important lesson to start building in now. And even little bitty kids can manage choices. I had one little kid who was about 2, barely had any language, say, I choose to leave now. And I said, I don't blame you. We're good. So one of the questions also talked about interrupters for recommendations. There's lots of kids who are taking up lots of time. Then there are lots of kids who are deathly afraid of speaking up because the Zoom will come in on them individually in many of these programs, and they don't like that, and they can also see themselves in the corner of the screen. And so what I would say is, talk to your kiddos about what are the important things. And so you may want to just sit through one of the sessions with the kiddos and say, what did you have to say about that? For the kiddos who aren't saying anything, what did you have to say about that? Was it important to you? Did you want to share that? And then the next time say, okay, so if you think there might be 1 or 2 things to share during your Zoom session, pick which ones are really important, and then I'm going to encourage you to share those. Take the time to say, hey, I have something to add, and give them some words to help them intervene if somebody continues to talk. Some kids really enjoy being on and like to see themselves and like to chat, and they're processing very much that way. But what you can say is, even if there's kids on and they're in the middle of a conversation, say, you know, I have something really important to add to that. I think that's a great idea, or I think that's a good plan, but I have something that I think would be important to share as well. I think those are perfectly fine strategies to teach your kids. I think they're lifelong lessons, once again.
Oh, Colleen.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you the 4:32 mark.
Great. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you. Another real quick one is alone time. And I'll go through this you got to figure out if your kid likes alone time or not. If the kid is more introverted, which means they need to be quiet to charge, that's probably not going to be a hard sell. If your kid is not that kid, probably one of the things I tell everybody to do is do something of great interest that's calming. Maybe it's reading or block building or Legos or something like that. Do it with your kid, and then slowly move it into their space so that they can continue to do the activity like over a couple of days. And then they will be able to find that activity maybe more interesting if you transition it slowly back into a space that just includes them. All right. The last thing that I'm going to talk to everybody is using physical cues and language. If you say one thing, but your body says something else, your kids are going to read it. And I'm getting this from a lot of kids. They say, my mom has a nice voice, but her face is very angry, or it reads it very differently, or vice versa. Okay. One of the things that everybody always wants to know about is this doggone tantrum wheel that I talk about all the time. It's a neurochemical response to being over capacity. And one of the things, I'm going to go ahead and hold this up and just keep talking. But one of the things that I try to tell everybody is we all have triggers. So your kiddo's trigger might be they desperately want a second or third cookie, and they only get 1 cookie every night after dinner, always the same. You have no idea why they're even asking this. And they just keep pushing. This right here is the level of when they engage. What happens is it's like a cliff. You can see them heading towards it 100 miles an hour. There's very little you can do about it. You see their eyes glaze over, and it turns into mayhem. They have an absolute, complete meltdown. The things that tend to contribute to that, over here, engagement. The things that tend to contribute to that are the hungry, thirsty, tired, sick, sensory, or injury. And if any of those things are happening, your opportunity to redirect is going to be very small. If they're in a pretty good place, you might be able to say, hey, you can't have another cookie, but you can have half a muffin or something like whatever you might like. Once they go down that road, though, what you have to realize is the inhibitory neurochemicals are gone or down very low, and the excitatory neurochemicals are up. So fight, flight, or freeze is where your kid is at. When they're really in the middle of that tantrum, it is the same as if they were being chased down the street by a gigantic bear. Most of the time, they don't hear you, they don't see you, they are not reasonable in any way. So what happens is your body, as the caregiver, responds to your child's level of distress. What happens is your blood pressure tends to go up, your heart rate tends to go up. You have all kinds of physical responses to your child's level of distress. So what happens is your kid goes down the road crying, screaming, and just hysterical. Then you get to a place where they start to simmer down just a little bit. And invariably what most adults do is they start talking and they're trying to be reasonable. And what they're really trying to do is manage their own distress, but it sends the kid right back up here. If you talk to them or ask anything of them or whatever, it's going to go around. And so this is usually 5 to 7 minutes. Could be more or less depending on the kiddo. But if people are like, oh no, my kid was melting down for a half an hour, it's around and around where they rev up. It's like a siren, woo, and then they simmer down, and then it's woo, and they simmer down. So what I tell everybody to do is, starting at the beginning, this is about safety. Keep your kids safe, keep an eye on them. But this whole time you're taking care of yourself. You're deep breathing, you're maybe doing a little meditation, you're reminding yourself that you're a great parent and you're going to get through this, however it works for you. But this is the tricky place for most parents. If you can take care of yourself here, you're literally demonstrating in real time what you'd like your kid to do, which is stay chill. So once you get here, what happens typically is kids then go into a sad phase. Why is everyone picking on me? Why is this so difficult? This is so hard. I hate this, whatever that looks like. That's an indicator that the inhibitory neurochemicals are coming up. The excitatory neurochemicals are going down. You still have to wait, though, till they come around. And when they take, a lot of kids will take a deep breath. A lot of kids will have a quiver that kind of marks the end of that physiological change. This is the most important part. At the end of this cycle is the most important part, because this is a can't. I can't do any better than this because neurochemically I'm a hot mess. What happens is, if you don't have corrective behaviors and interventions at the end of this, this becomes a learned behavior. If I pitch a fit, I get away with whatever it is that I was hoping to get. So this might be, just take the cookie, just take the cookie, but stop crying. That kid will eventually learn very quickly that this is how you get what you want. So what you want to do is say, I'm so sorry you couldn't have a cookie, but you can have a muffin, or you can have a carrot, or you can have a piece of cheese, or you have to say you're sorry to your brother, or you have to pick up your blocks, or all the things you threw, you have to go pick those up and put those away. That has to happen here. Otherwise, you inadvertently reinforce this negative behavior that's going to be repeated time and time again, because it's, for some kids, it has turned out to be a very effective strategy. Okay. All right. Any questions in real time that anybody has? I covered as much stuff as I could, as quickly as I could, but I know everybody's situations are different.
Colleen, one of our attendees would like to know where to find the article about stress associated with virtual learning.
Oh, it was actually on TV last night, and it was based, I believe I was watching Channel 9. It was about identifying our stressed out learners. So they may still, many times they'll still have things posted for several days, if not longer.
So I'd like to invite anybody who would like to have Colleen answer a question. She can answer questions about a broad range of behaviors that you might be seeing. Don't be shy.
What if somebody shared with me what your biggest challenge is during the day? Would anybody be willing to share that? One of the things that I would say is I talk to upward of 30 people a week, and everybody thinks they're the only ones that aren't doing it right, or everybody thinks that they're the only ones who don't have as much patience as they need, or that they aren't as kind as they should be, or they aren't as stalwart as they should be. And I think if everybody feels that way, that's very isolating, and it feels very self-critical. And what I try to explain is we are all doing our best. And nobody ever expected to be in all of these roles. Okay, child is distracted by background noise. And what is the rest of that question, Betsy?
It says movement.
Oh, movement. Okay, so if you've got a kid who is very easily distracted, one of the things I tell everybody to do is, a lot of folks have fixed step space for their kids. And I'm like, yes, absolutely perfect. Great. Do it. Whiteboards are great, whatever you need. But also, if you make it too quiet or too isolated, will they have trouble going back into the classroom where it is never going to be quiet and it will never be calm? So what I try to say is give them something to do in their personal space. And that's what I was talking about, those non-latex TheraBands. They are big, wide bands that you put at the base of a chair, and the kids tuck their feet behind them, and then they can go like this, right? Because if your kid's moving, they're less likely to be distracted than if they're not moving. If they're not moving, everything's a distraction. If their body's getting something, they are much more likely to stay focused. The other thing is if they have squishy fidgets, or if they have, well, if they're sitting on a yoga ball and they're just kind of floating in front of their desk or things like that, it makes it much easier for kiddos to stay engaged, even if 14 cars just went by honking, or there's 9 cats in the yard, or whatever else is going on. But we also, what we don't want to do is expect the world to stop moving, because the classroom, when they're back in the classroom, whether full or part-time, they're going to be dysregulated because of all the other noise and all the other kids shuffling and all other scrapings and bells and whistles and all those things that are going on. So give them something to entertain their body to help keep their brain focused.
Okay, now we have a clarification needed. How do you know when to respond in the corrective manner on the tantrum circle?
When the kiddos are done. So when they get to that point where I know you're like holding a little guy and they're like, and then they're like, and you can sort of feel the energy change. And then they're just like, ugh. And you go, okay, buddy, I know that was really hard, or I know that was a big challenge, or whatever. And I am sure that you can apologize to your sister. Let's go give that a try and help them out at that point. But if you don't wait long enough till you can sort of really feel that energy leave their body, then it tends to make them go around and around and around more frequently and for a longer period of time.
And there's a question about a child who has speech issues and tantrums. How might that impact?
The only thing worse than being frustrated is being frustrated not being able to tell anyone. And I did see something along those lines. For those kiddos, what I really encourage people to do is use as much either sign language or body language as possible. So when a kiddo has some any kind of speech challenges or delays, what I say is you demonstrate what you want, right? So if you need for them to kind of calm, then you sit in front of them and you take nice deep breaths like Darth Vader so they can really hear you. And you take it in and you breathe out slowly and you say, they may or may not be able to follow you at that point, but they're learning. Okay, the middle of their brain is logging in this information, and it's really something that will start to get lodged in their awareness if you're demonstrating it, because they learn by watching. They hear all day, but what they really do, especially early on, is learn by watching. So parents may say one thing but do something else. I guarantee you the kid's going to learn what you did, not what you said first. So if you just sit down and you pick a yoga pose you like or whatever, and you're just like, I'm being calm, I'm going to figure out how to make my body feel better. Those are real-time strategies that you can demonstrate instead of getting, a lot of people go, what do you need? What do you want? And you get agitated. What you do is you sit down and go, I'm going to take care of me. Let's take care of you too. And teach them how to do that until they get the words that they can communicate more effectively to you. But in the meantime, you've taught them a lot of really good things about body and your brain and your body being connected and taking care of yourself and being able to express yourself, because once they get calm, maybe they can take you hand over hand and tell you what they need, or show you what they want, or pick something out of the pantry or whatever. But that's not going to happen when they're really distressed.
Thank you. Do you see
Oh,
there's another question about, yes, the question about anxiety and about being perfect and getting everything correct.
Okay, lots of that going on. Either there's a whole lot of don't give a flying fig, or I got to get it right, it has to be perfect. All things all the time are usually in between those the ends. So I always tell everybody, the black and white is rarely going to get you anywhere. It's that nice mushy gray area that nobody really knows how to navigate, where that balance is found. So what I talk to kids who want or seek perfection is that I'll be very honest with them. I said, you're looking for something that will never exist. So in your brain, it's called dissonant thinking. So I want to be perfect, but I understand that that's not real, or that that can't happen. There's no such thing. But I still am striving for the impossible. It creates an enormous amount of anxiety. So what I tell everybody is that's part of that good enough discussion. How will you know when it's good enough? You did it once, you did it correctly, you've checked it over. Can we put that away now? If something's wrong on it, that's learning. So if your kid goes to school and does everything right and it's perfect all the time, they're in the wrong grade. They're not learning. They are learned in the past, but they are not learning currently. You have to make mistakes. I learn best from my mistakes. I couldn't tell you what I got right on my boards in grad school. I can tell you which ones I got wrong because I went home and I looked them up and it made me mad. So I figured out what I had gotten wrong. So tell them, though, that is the challenge. That is the mystery of learning, is that if you never make a mistake, you probably aren't in the right place. So kids will say, well, but especially the really sharp cookies will say, but this is easy and this is easy and this is hard. And I'm like, I know, that's the best mystery, right? So some things are very easy for you, but this is very challenging. Can you bring your tenacity to this thing and your love of learning to this thing that's hard and get through it? Because it's the stuff we do that's hard that builds our self-esteem. It's very rarely the stuff we're given or the things that come easily to us. It's when we fall down and we get up and we realize that we can get up on our own that makes us stand taller. So it's all very interwoven and it's very interconnected. But if the kids don't ever fall down, they don't ever learn to stand up on their own either. It doesn't mean we're not standing right there making sure they're safe. We are, but you got to give them that chance to get up on and do it themselves. Sometimes they have to struggle. Sometimes they have to try. I said that like the 3 times, try it 3 different ways. But one of the things I say is try it the second time, try it a different way. Because then the problem is not the worksheet or the math problem or whatever. Now the problem is, can you find another solution? Can you find another way to manage this? So you're teaching them about problem solving outside of a singular activity or task. So if it's not working this way, what other ways could you look at it that might help you understand or might help you complete this assignment? Everything that I urge people to teach their kids is sort of a life lesson, a longitudinal lesson. That's a lesson that would last you a lifetime. So we can get frustrated because it wasn't perfect, or we can find the mystery of this exciting and dig in and try to find other ways that work for us to learn it. Some kids learn kinesthetically, some kids learn verbally, some kids learn auditorily, and some kids it's a mix. So if it's not working for you the way you're doing it, just see if you can figure out a new way to do it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. We have another question on another topic. How would you get a 2.5-year-old child to sit at the table and eat his dinner?
Okay, this is universally crazy making for parents. So what happens is, just so you know, once you start cooking or once you bring food into the house, your child's brain registers the smells, because kids are very olfactory in their orientation, and they start building up an appetite and they start getting hungry. That's why everybody melts down 20 minutes before dinner. And people notoriously will say, I don't want to ruin your dinner. And I'm like, well, screaming ruins everyone's dinner. So If you can give your kid a high protein, healthy bite or two before dinner, sometimes that will get them to the table. Once they're at the table, what you have to do is realize that the little guys have a 3 to 10 minute time frame that they can hold still. So whatever really important stuff needs to happen in that time frame, depending on your kid, it's got to be pretty speedy. So if the table's set and all that, but if there's a lot of falderall getting the food on the table or whatever, and your kid's sitting there, I always say, get everything ready to go. Put your kid in the seat, ready, set, go. You might have 10 minutes if you're lucky when they're that age. Now, some kids will sit there and play forever, but they're not actually eating. They're playing at the table. And if you allow that, that's fine. If you don't allow that, some people don't.
Okay, we have one more question. What resources do you recommend for a parent of a 5-year-old with anger management issues?
Okay. One of the things that I would say is if you know why they're frustrated, or for example, if they have asynchronistically developing skills, so they're really far ahead in something and really lagging behind in something else, which happens a lot. There's a lot of times where these kids are very cognitively advanced, but very socially and emotionally delayed. And the bigger that gap is, the more angry your kid's gonna look. So if they're bringing in the world at a very high level, but they're coping with it at a fairly low level, that creates a lot of anger and frustration. You got a really crabby kid. So you got to figure out where it's coming from. Is it because there's a gap in their development? Because it all evens out over time, but very different times during their development might have greater gaps. I would say a vast majority of times when I see really angry kids, and it's not based on, now, if the family dog just passed away, or you moved 3 times in 6 months, or your house burned down, there's kids who are angry and you know exactly why they're angry. But if there's no other discernible cause, right now it's very hard to tell because kids can't see their friends the same way. They're not out playing the same way. I mean, there's a lot of changes for a lot of kids. But if most things are similar, then I would look at their development. Is there something going way ahead and something lagging behind? If it continues to be a problem, then I would seek the counsel of somebody who is an early childhood mental health specialist and has what's called a Michigan endorsement. And that means they have a significant amount of training in early childhood. Early childhood is different than later childhood and is certainly different than teens and adults. You got to have somebody who specializes in that area to really be able to help you out because they have to understand the developmental piece of all of it. Any other thoughts or questions or?
It looks like I'm going to jump in here. My
Sorry.
kiddo is wanting to watch TV, phone, semi-educational. What can I do when he cries? I'm assuming that's also like when it's done.
Okay. So one of the things you guys have to remember is we are in a technological age. You are facing challenges that nobody has ever faced to this degree before. What you have to know is very deliberately, purposefully and mindfully, these companies who are providing software as well as hardware are targeting children of all ages. No age child is off the table as far as a future consumer. In fact, they call them lifetime consumers, and I think they've stopped doing that now. But there are things, there is an addiction element that is built into most technology because they want it to be attractive. So if it's attractive, right, so you buy it, you download it, you look at it, you watch it. If it's attractive to the kids, there's the risk that it will become too attractive. And what happens is a lot of times we get, it's like a dopamine drip. When these kids find things that they really like and they like to watch or they like to play or they like to engage in on phones or iPads or computers, when they're doing it, they're getting an immediate, the way they're built is they're getting an immediate feedback loop of positive hormones. So it could be endorphins and dopamine or whatever. And what's happening is when you ask them to disconnect from that, it is the same response. It's like turning off the spigot of the good stuff in your brain. So it's like the worst analogy I can come up with, but it's accurate, is if you take somebody who smokes and you take their cigarettes away and go, come here, eat dinner and be happy. But you can't smoke anymore, or you can't gamble anymore, or you can't shop anymore, or you can't, anything that makes you feel good. When people come in and want you to stop doing that, there's usually some resistance to it. So we have to remember that these are just little people. They're very engaged in their little world, and they're getting, you know, it's pretty colors, or it's giving you, if you get the right numbers, that gives you a beep and a good job and or whatever. It's creating creating a hormonal drip of happy that is going. And when you interrupt that, like especially when kids are older and they're playing a video game with all their friends, and you say come to dinner and they just start crying and screaming, see it all the time, that's because you turned off the spigot of the brain chemicals. So transitions are really important, but I give kids, especially the little ones, make it real. Don't give them 5 minutes. 5 minutes to a kid means nothing, because we don't use our language very well around time. So we say, hey, I'm on the phone, give me 5 minutes. 20 minutes later, kid's like, wait, can you give me, you know, dessert or whatever? Nope, give me 5 minutes. It's another 20 minutes. So then we tell the kids you have 5 minutes to get your shoes on, and they think that's forever. So what you do is give them a little sand timer. If you want them to get off in 2 minutes, and you buy a little 97-cent sand timer that's 2 minutes, and you say, when the sand's all gone, you have to be off, and turn it off and come to the table, or come in and finish your schoolwork, or whatever it is. Use those sand timers. The kids get it. They can see the time going. That gives them some sense of the level of urgency to how fast they have to move.
Okay, we're getting a lot more questions all of a sudden. How can I have my 2-year-old twins nap when both parents are working from home? The only way I can get them to nap is by driving.
Oh boy, I am so sorry, because that is a tough thing. What's clearly happening is your kids are getting the stimulation that they need from the car to let their bodies relax. What if you swung them on a Huggle Pod or something just prior to nap time? I'm wondering if that might help you. Do you know what a Huggle Pod is? It looks like a big teardrop, and you can hang it from a rafter, you can hang it out on a deck or something like that, and put it in it and swing them for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever, and see if that might give them enough of that input to help them go to sleep. I think it's worth a shot.
That's a great idea. Is it possible to find a copy of the Tantrum Cycle anywhere?
You know what, Betsy? I will get you, I should have gotten you one a long time ago, but I will get you guys one for your file.
Thank you. Here's a question. How does low working memory impact behavior and learning?
Okay, so if a kiddo if that is a struggle, if that's a challenge, working memory is what we use every day to manage our ADLs, activities of daily living. We know where our shoes are, and when we're supposed to do something, and when bath time is, and all that kind of stuff. So if that is an area that's being developed, what I always tell everybody is it requires a little bit more patience, because it requires more repetition to get that in and keep it in. Because a lot of times what happens is a memory or a learned piece of information will be in there, and then if something new is introduced, it will bop it right out. So what I say is sometimes it will take more repetition typically, and repetition that is delivered in a very patient way. Imagine, like sometimes I say when kiddos are struggling with this, it's like when you're dealing with a senior citizen who is like, where are my keys? Or me sometimes, like, where are my keys? Like, I put my keys in the same place every day. If I don't put my keys in the same place every day, I can't find them. So imagine how frustrating that is when you don't have maybe as many words, or you don't have as many strategies, or you don't have wisdom that you've learned over many years in terms of organizational skills. Organizational things, giving buckets and squares and places for things to go, and really consistent scheduling and visual schedules. all will help that. Even if you have to tell a kid, go check your schedule, that will help them get back on track.
Great. And here's a mom who has tried a lot of different things to make transitions easier. And she's wondering what your ideas might be. She's tried singing. She's tried having her kids act like animals, hop like a bunny. What else might help transition times?
Transitioning in terms of going from a non-preferred activity to from a preferred activity to a non-preferred activity?
I would guess so.
Okay, that's why I always say the non-preferred activities come first. So we're going to do all of our chores and feed the doggies and do this and do that and whatever. And then we'll bunny hop to the park, or then whatever that looks like. So if you're trying to go the other way, they're going to go kicking and screaming. So like, but I'm doing something fun and I really like it. Why are you going to make me do something awful? So I'm like, well, let's do all the stuff we have to do. I try not to think of it as awful things, but all the things that we have to do before we do the things we really, really want to do, because then you don't have a problem with the transition. But it takes a little bit of restructuring. Yeah.
We have time for one more? Or
absolutely.
Okay. I've told my child I will talk with them once they calm down during a tantrum, and they immediately flip. I think that means they immediately calm down. And
Okay, so what? Okay, so that was totally fake, because when your kid is in the middle of that tantrum wheel and it's a neurological thing, they can't stop. They can't. It's a slower process for those chemicals to come back. If you say, well, I'm sorry, that means you don't get ice cream or whatever, and they go, whoop, that is complete manipulation. They can control it. That is a learned behavior. That is baloney. If they're like, I don't care, then they're just absolutely melting down. Then you got to wait it out, because you know that neurochemically they aren't there. They are not in a place where they can reason. They're not in a place where they can be reasonable. But if you say something and they stop on a dime, you just called their bluff.
Okay, there's one more. One thing that comes to mind for this attendee is that sometimes kids become more withdrawn or sad than angry or cranky. I've also heard that depression has become more common at this time. Any observations or thoughts about that?
You are absolutely right. I'm looking at kids who have never demonstrated any depression before, and it's manifesting itself in a lot of ways. Lots more of crying, a lot more lashing out, a lot more like you look around, you can't find your kid anywhere and they're sitting in a corner. You're like, goodness, what are you doing over there? They are as susceptible to depression as we adults are. When one of the things, I think it's a whole different topic, and I don't want to open Pandora's box, but I think what people don't realize is we are swimming in grief and loss right now, all of us. We have lost our sense of normalcy. We have lost our ability to be with friends and family to some degree. We have lost our ability to travel or to do different activities depending on our level of how isolated we are being. Anytime that you have grief and loss in the mix, anything is possible. So what I tell everybody is, if you can talk about it, that's important. If you can say, I know I am so sad that I don't get to see my friends too, there will be a day where we'll all be able to see each other and we'll all be able to go back to preschool or whatever it is that we're missing. But kids can understand grief because they feel it. They may not have the words around it that we have as adults, but I don't think we do a great job with grief and loss as adults either. I mean, I don't think we often know what we're feeling, how to talk about it, how to sit with somebody who is feeling lousy, who's feeling grief. I think we really struggle with that. So it's hard to help our kids when we're not really even sure as adults, what are we grieving? Like, if each of us stop and think about, what are you grieving about current circumstances? Some people it's, I lost my job. Some people it's, my house is in danger. Some people it's the freedom to go to yoga class a couple times a week. Some people, who knows? But anytime there's grief and loss, there's a possibility that people can get really, really down. So watch your kid. One of the things that helps with that is movement, 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 movement. So if you see your kids starting to get slower and we kind of find them in corners and looking like they're really not, they're not themselves, that's when I start, we're going for a walk. Even in the dead of winter, we're going for a walk. We're putting our boots on and our hats and our mittens, and we're going to go count bunny tracks, or we're going to go do something. Movement creates endorphins, just like that runner's high, that help lift our spirits. If people stop moving, they tend to sink.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That's very good advice, and we've come to the end of our hour and a little bit more. I hope we'll be back at a family place workshop in person one day, but this was a great session for everyone. I would just wanted to mention that we will have a parenting strategies session in October on the 27th, which will be music together. So that will be something that you can attend with your child. And then in November, we'll have a speech development expert. And we did have a question in the box about raising bilingual children. And that will be a good time to answer that question when we have our speech pathologist on November 17th. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye now.